time? Yeah. We'll just wait for Councillor Ferguson to around. Anything else you'd like to shift, remodel? I would like to call the meeting to order, please. Good morning, everyone. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. Other individuals and the media may also be audibly and or visually recording this meeting. As well, a reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during committee meetings. Members of the I get in enough trouble, Councillor Clark. I don't need any help from you. Thank you. Members of the committee and members of the audience, before we start our regular business today, I would like to take a moment to recognize Marie Robbins. It is with such sorrow that we offer our condolences to the family and friends of Marie, who passed away on January 1st of this year. Marie, as you know, was a lifelong resident of Stoney Creek. She worked tirelessly to make our community a better place. She was the recipient of the 2016 Citizen of the Year Award and a dedicated member of the city's Immigrant and Refugee and Status of Women Volunteer Advisory Committees for the past several years. But more importantly, she was a kind, generous, and gracious woman who touched the lives of many in Hamilton, and she will be greatly missed. On that note of what citizenship is all about, I will recognize Councillor Partridge first.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, Marie was an exceptional human being. I served with her on the Trillium Foundation for several years, and we really miss her. And I know Councillor Pearson had said some good words in the media about Marie this morning. But I have to leave at around 11:30. Hopefully we'll be done by then, but if not, I will be taking my leave. Thank you.
We're here to approve, first of all, the agenda. Madam Clerk, are there any changes?
We have two added delegation requests. Item 6.2, Tom Hunter, CEO of City Housing, respecting a request for abatement for a water leak at 25 Tower Crest Drive. That request is for a future meeting. And for today's meeting, item 6.3, Rosemary Fisher, representing ArcelorMittal Long Product Canada, respecting the raw water supply agreement and seeking an extension of 1 month on the deadlines for finalizing the contract. And again, that's for today's meeting. We are withdrawing several consent items, 7.1M to R, which are the LGBTQ Advisory Committee minutes. They are being withdrawn because of formatting changes and to allow the chair to come to a future meeting of AFNA and delegate.
Thank you. Thank you, Clerk. We will require an electronic vote to approve the agenda as amended. May I have a mover and seconder? Councillor Vanderbeek and Councillor Pearson. Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest this morning? Hearing none. Oh, beg your pardon? We have to vote. Always an important part of citizenship as well. Thank you. That carries. Declarations of interest, I didn't see any. There are minutes before you from the previous meeting of December the 5th. We require an electronic vote to approve the minutes. Moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Partridge. Electronic vote. Thank you, and that passes. Delegation requests. There are two. We require an electronic vote for them. 6.1 is Ferdad Shador Shabchi, respecting water bill charges, and that is for a future meeting. And Tom Hunter, the CEO of City Housing Hamilton, respecting an abatement of a water leak. May I have a mover and a seconder to approve that? Councillor Johnson, the new chair of the Conservation Authority. And Councillor Collins, thank you. Electronic vote, please. Oh, and I beg your pardon, we have 6.3. Sorry, 2 votes. One on the future and one on the today's. Thank you. Okay, thank you, that carries. 6.3, as previously mentioned by the clerk, Rosemary Fisher and Bart Sash of ArcelorMittal for today. Councillor Vanderbeek and Councillor Partridge, thank you. Electronic vote. Very good. That passes. Consent items. May I have a motion to receive the Voluntary Advisory Committee minutes, items 7.1A through to 7.1L? Thank you. Councillor Ferguson and Councillor Collins. All in favor? We don't need a, we do need. There's only one mistake a day allowed. Okay, that carries. 7.2, consent item, fraud, waste, and whistleblower update. Councillor Collins and Councillor Partridge. Carried. Oh, I'm so sorry. Sir Clark?
Quick question, just wanted to ask the Auditor General when the actual report, the annual report, would be coming to the committee?
So we're planning for, and this will cover the year, obviously this is a report that covers up to the end of Q3, so we're planning the annual report for April.
Thank you.
Okay. So that item carried, Madam Clerk. 7.3, the 2020 temporary borrowing and interim tax levy bylaws. We require an electronic vote to approve the recommendations in item 7.3. Councillor Pearson, did you have a question or are you just moving? Thank you, Councillor Pearson and Councillor Vanderbeek. All in favor or opposed? Thank you, that carries. Item 7.4, education development charge update. I do have a question and I would like Councillor Collins, I would request that he take the chair while I, just a quick question on that item. To Mr. Zagaric, I'm just curious, I understand that private schools are now exempt from paying education development charges. My question is that are they new to that? And do you know the rationale for that? Through you, Mr. Chair.
So through the chair, a private school that is a commercial entity in the past were subject to development charges, and I'll use a local example. Columbia College was required to pay development charges as well as property taxes. With respect to why the provincial government is implementing this policy, I'm not aware. I can circle back with staff at the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and ask whether or not there is a rationale or whether that was part of a consultation process. I'm not aware that municipalities put forward any argument to extend the exemptions. To the contrary, municipalities typically have sought that growth should pay for growth and that exemptions should be limited. But again, I'm not familiar with the rationale as to why the legislation and regulation was amended.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zagaric. I appreciate that. If you were able to obtain any rationale, I wouldn't mind you passing it along my way. Thank you. I'll take the chair back. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. Through you to Mr. Segarek. Mr. Segarek, on page 2 of 3, under 1, it says a memorial home, clubhouse, or athletic grounds owned by the Royal Canadian Legion, which I'm fully in support of. But we have a lot of towns across this country that have Air Force associations because if they're near an airport. The 447 Wing is one of them, and the government recognizes them as equal to a Legion. The Legion has 2 of the 3 military departments, and the Air Force is on its own. So the Air Force associations, are they to be included in this? Can we get some clarity on that, please?
Through the chair, we can take that request back and do some research surrounding the definitions under subsection 6. So as committee members, I'm sure can appreciate, there's often definitions tied to these descriptors, and so we will take that back and we'll do a little research as to what those definitions apply to, and if it does support those organizations, we'll provide that update to committee members.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Clark.
Thank you very much. So just trying to understand some clarity here. Municipalities were or were not consulted on this new regulation before it came in?
Mr. Segarek.
So through the chair, the City of Hamilton did provide and council put forward resolutions surrounding development charges specific to the private schools. I'm not aware that we were informed of a potential change, nor am I aware that we were consulted directly or indirectly through some of the associations that we participate on.
And Madam Chair, if I'm not mistaken, we made some changes to our DCs this last round regarding universities and colleges. So now how does this impact that?
So through the chair, we'll have to take this back to see how this would apply to our bylaw, but as well as again, I'm sure committee members can appreciate often these legislations apply to any updates to bylaws, so we'll have to determine whether or not it requires any amendments to our bylaw or whether this would have to be incorporated into the next development charge bylaw. So again, we'll have to take that back and do some further investigation.
And when we do that review, Madam Chair, can we also understand or try to get an understanding as to how this regulation would impact universities if they're working with the private sector, because they're developing these private-public partnerships where the private sector is actually the owner of the facility but is on university land, and it's a profit-driven facility. And the way that it's worded in the regulation, if it's owned, the land is owned by the university. So if we can get some clarification in that report back on what we have to do with our DC bylaw, that would be very helpful, because I'm just growing a little bit more concerned about these private-public partnerships that are really designed to avoid taxes more than anything else.
Thank you, Mr. Councillor Clark. I share that concern. I know Mr. Segarek has had many conversations about this, but I'll let him speak.
Through the chair, we will report back, and I'll just remind committee there is a outstanding business item list with respect to post-secondary institutions and development charges that I'll just remind committee as well that is subject to resolution on the outstanding development charge appeals. So again, that's been parked subject to the outcome of the existing appeals from those institutions.
So, Madam Chair, any idea how long it will take to do the review and come back to Audit and Finance? Not rushing you, Mr. Segarek, just curious.
Yeah, so through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I'll take it back to staff. I just know that the same staff who would be tasked with this are in the midst of some additional work right now surrounding the budgets.
Really?
I would hope, I would hope no later than Q2 of this year.
And I understand that completely. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a lot going on in finance. I appreciate that. Thank you all for those questions. May I have a motion to receive item 7.4? Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Ferguson. Thank you. We have guests in the audience, I believe. I would like to call upon Rosemary Fisher. We're now on to the delegation portion of the agenda, and Bart Sarsh of ArcelorMittal Long Product Canada, respecting the raw water supply agreement. And they are seeking an extension of 1 month on the deadlines for finalizing the contract. Yes, right from the podium. Welcome. Thank you for being here. The way our procedures go is that you have 5 minutes for your delegation, and you'll see a timer on the screen.
I promise I'll stay under that. I'm Rosemary Fisher. Mr. Sarsh is my associate. He is not here. We weren't sure who was able to be here. And Mr. Guillermo Jorquera is here from ArcelorMittal. And I gave you my presentation, and you should have a copy of correspondence that I exchanged with Mr. Tansley and Ms. Robertshaw from the City of Hamilton's legal department. So just by way of background, you should be familiar with the fact that there is a raw water supply to the ArcelorMittal plant at 690 Strathern. The pumping station that feeds that raw water supply is owned by the city. There's an error in my presentation. The pumping station's at 700 Woodward at the treatment plant. So that water comes in through a pipeline that's owned by ArcelorMittal. Arcelor acquired this plant in 2009, 2006 from Stelco. Stelco built the pumping station pursuant to an agreement, but title was transferred to the city as well pursuant to an agreement. There's been no raw water supply agreement since 1985. And so, as I'm sure you're aware from previous meetings, it became an issue due to the upgrades at Woodward. So what we're looking for, the parties are in good faith trying to negotiate a new raw water supply agreement. We'd reached a further extension to yesterday. With no agreement being executed, then the city is able to terminate supply by the end of January. I can say confidently we are close, but we need a little bit more time. So just to clarify in terms of the extension, what I was looking for in my letter of January 14th, not 10th, which is what my memo says, was an extension relative to the executed agreement being done by February 7th, and then termination not before February 28th. The reason being is there is an extant court application that was done just to give us time to try and work on a resolution. But we could be called to court at any time. My client would like to focus on resolution, not litigation. So we just need a bit more time to work on the agreement so that I can advise the court that they don't need to call us, because that's the way it works. We're on what's called a long motions list. As soon as they get us a judge, we could get called. It's a lot of time and money on both sides to go to court on something like this, and we're trying to avoid that. So the month is in respect of the termination. A little shorter time period, I guess 2 more weeks on the agreement. And I think then I've covered everything I needed to cover, subject to any questions.
Thank you very much for being here. We do have some questions for you, so if you don't mind sticking around.
Not at all.
Thank you. Councillor Partridge?
Yes, thank you, Rosemary, welcome. But just so you know, we were just handed these documents. We have not seen them before now, okay? So
Fair enough.
I do appreciate your explanation and giving us a bit more. So I'm going to ask you to expand on it a little bit, because I haven't had time to really digest everything that's here. You're saying that you feel you'll be at an agreement by February 7th, or you will have be able to complete everything that you need to do by February 7th in terms of the implementations?
Well, it's getting the agreement done by February 7th. I mean, I think, and I mean a signed agreement by February
Right, so a signed agreement by February 7th, but what about the implementation of everything in the agreement?
The agreement would reference, in terms of implementation, Right now, there's a raw water supply. And with the upgrades to the plant, it's going to change how that happens. For example, right now there's 900 meters of pipe or cable.
Right.
That's got to be switched out to 2,700 meters. Are you talking about those kinds of physical changes on the switchover, or are you?
I don't know, I just received this, so I'm not
Okay,
really
so the
sure what's
raw
in this or
water
what your issues are.
Okay, so the raw water supply agreement is going to govern what ArcelorMittal pays for raw water, what responsibilities ArcelorMittal has relative to the pipeline, what responsibilities the city has. As I stated, the existing agreement was drafted in 1965 and it expired in 1985. Subsequently, Stelco, and then subsequently thereafter, ArcelorMittal, essentially abided by the terms of that agreement. So we're just trying to put something into place. This was the city's impetus because of the upgrades.
Okay, thank you. And so when you purchased this, the deadline was already in place for the end of January?
No, the plant was purchased, let me just get the right year, I think it was, 2005
Right,
is when Arcelor purchased this plant from Stelco.
okay.
So everybody just operated in the normal course for all those years, but because of the upgrades at Woodward, this became an issue of importance to the city, as I understand it.
And these are recent upgrades to Woodward?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's a significant contract.
Okay, so I'm going to have some questions for staff, which I will ask after all the speakers have asked you your questions, okay? Thank you.
Rosemary, we have another question for you from Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, thank you, Rosemary, and welcome. And always like to see ArcelorMittal in here. They're a great employer and pay a lot of taxes to the city. This is your second time back, and you weren't here, but
Oh,
this came to us just before Christmas, and they asked for an extension till the end of January. Now you're asking till the end of February. Can you publicly state this is it? We know more.
I expect it to be it.
I'm sorry?
I expect it to be it. There are some reasons, I think. I mean, the Christmas holidays, the turnaround times in the agreements, staff changes within the legal department, people being
Well, you always have those issues. You always have holidays, and you always have...
understood.
But you agreed to January 31st, just last December, I believe it was. But and I'd have, I certainly want to help Arcelor. And I have questions for staff too, which I'll wait until after the delegation is received. But I'd like you to publicly state, because everything's being recorded in here,
Fair enough.
this is it.
As I tell my kids, I never make promises I can't keep. It is my expectation that this is it. And I understand your question, Councillor, I really do. I can state categorically from my client's side of it, we have worked diligently. We have turned this agreement around every time we've had the comments very, very quickly.
Okay, and I tend to ask our staff, do they agree that we're very close?
Absolutely, I'm happy to have you ask them. I'm quite confident that we have been working diligently. In-house counsel at ArcelorMittal is dealing with that because I'm just a dumb litigator, I don't draft contracts. And I'm in constant contact with them and I know that's their focus. And that's why I'm here, because we'd rather do that this way, with an agreement, than go to court. The problem here, and the only reason we initiated the application, is to give us some time, because otherwise the water gets turned off and that plant shuts down.
Have the commercial issues been settled? Do you have an agreement on that?
When you say the commercial issue, oh yeah, there's no issue on, I can tell you, on price per cubic meter of water. There's no issue on the contribution relative to upgrades. There's no issue, there's an easement agreement that's got to be dealt with as well because the pipeline crosses city property. Easement fee, that's not an issue to my knowledge. Now, Mr. Tansley's here from the city, I believe, so he can speak to those bits of the contract because he's working on them. But no, it's not that.
Okay, that's all my questions. I also have questions for staff.
Thank you. And you did open your comments by saying both sides are bargaining in good faith. So perhaps we can go to the next Councillor Clark has questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm just going to try and paraphrase so that I understand what is being asked. There is a raw water supply agreement. You're asking for an extension to sign that agreement to February 7th.
Correct.
And that would mean that the termination of the supply, failing that agreement, would be February 28th.
Right.
So I'm just curious why the,
Lapse?
yeah,
So we can go to court.
just in case.
Right.
Okay, I understand. And so the intent is that if you can get this signed agreement by February the 7th
Or earlier.
or earlier, as soon as we have this, we can notify the courts that you're no longer on the long motions list.
Right, and in fact, if I get the extension today, councillors, I will tell the court they do not need to call us until at least February 7th. Like it's rather draconian. They'll call me the afternoon before and say, you're in tomorrow, as soon as they've got a judge for me.
It seems like a reasonable request to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions for the delegate? Thank you very much for taking the time to be here. Councillor Vanderbeek is seconded by Councillor Ferguson. Your delegation has been received and will be asking questions of staff.
Thank you for permitting me to be here. Appreciate it.
Thank you for taking the time. Okay. We have questions of staff pertaining to this, and I trust we can ask those now, Madam Clerk.
We're only required to go into closed if you are asking legal advice.
So, clerk said if you have questions pertaining to the legality of this, then we have to go into closed sessions. Okay, thank you. Councillor Partridge.
Yes, thank you. So to staff, I'm not sure who would be answering this, but so my question is, do you have any difficulty with the request?
Through the chair, no, we do not.
Okay. So Nicole, you're in the legal department, and so you're involved in this agreement?
Through the chair, yes.
Okay. And so do you feel that all the requirements will be met by February the 5th if we give that extension?
Through the chair, what I can tell you at this point is I can concur with what Council for ArcelorMittal has indicated, is that both parties are negotiating and working through this in good faith. It is certainly our expectation and our hope that that would happen. I mean, obviously things can come up, but at the moment that appears reasonable.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, I have the same question, so I'll simply move the extension be approved.
Moved by Councillor Ferguson and seconded by Councillor Clark that the extension to, I believe it was February the 7th. Yes, thank you. So, Madam Clerk. Yes, electronic vote on that motion. And that carries. Thank you. I know you will continue in good faith. Okay. We are on to our discussion items. Item 10.1 from the Pension Administration Subcommittee, Report 19-001. Are there any questions of staff or discussion respecting this item? Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Ferguson. Electronic vote, please. Thank you. That carries. Item 10.2, City of Hamilton External Audit Plan for 2019. May I have a motion? We have a question. Councillor Clark?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm trying to understand exactly where they're going to be doing their audits. And when I'm looking through the document, it's perhaps, I haven't had enough coffee this morning, it's not as clear as I'd like it to be. So I'm just curious. I'm seeing an audit risk, professional or fraud risk from revenue recognition. So are they auditing revenue recognition? What exactly are they planning on auditing in the external audit? Are they here?
Yeah, through the chair, I'm going to invite Lois Ouellette from KPMG, our external auditors, to the microphone. As Appendix A to the report is KPMG's audit plan. And maybe Lois, if she just wants to take the microphone here, and maybe Lois can take you through their proposed audit plan.
I appreciate that, because I'm seeing government grants, tangible capital assets, landfill operations or liability, just trying to understand exactly what you are going to be looking at to audit.
Welcome, Lois, and maybe you could walk us through the work.
Yes, certainly. We are auditing your financial statements. And so what we've highlighted in our report is the areas that we're focusing on. Those are financial statement line items in your financial statements. And so we will be auditing revenue recognition. And when we talk about revenue recognition, we're talking about the timing of when revenue is recognized in your financial statements. In other words, which year the revenue is recognized. So for tax revenue, that is a non-issue. It's a calendar year basis, so there's no judgment involved. It's very easy. Really, next to no testing is needed on revenue recognition. But things like government grants and development charges can get quite complex and requires considerable professional judgment on the part of your finance team to determine which year the revenue should be recognized. And so as auditors, we pay particular attention to the judgments that management are using in determining that, that judgment, and so that we're ensuring that revenue is recognized and presented in your financial statements appropriately.
I appreciate that. And if on page 8 of 20 of the appendix, it talks about employee future benefits, and then it talks about risk of material misstatement, completeness, accuracy of liability. So are you auditing the future liability of different employee benefits, gratuities, all of the things that almost you need an actuary to figure out how that's going to be done, and whether or not those actuarial projections are reasonable?
Correct. So those are the employee future benefits, such as the benefits that are paid to employees after they retire. It's all about the future benefits that employees are entitled to based on the agreements you have with your employees. And you are quite correct. Management does use an actuary to estimate those liabilities. And so typically the city goes and gets an actuary to estimate the liability every 3 years. And when they do that, we actually audit the information that the actuary has been sent, because they're sent your employee data. And if the employee data is not correct, then the actuary's estimate won't be correct. So every 3 years, we're auditing the data that's been sent. On an annual basis, we look at the assumptions that are embedded in that actuarial estimate. Key assumptions will be the discount rate that they use to estimate the liability. That's a big one. And the increase in the benefits, the percentage, increase, like the inflationary increase in benefits. Those are key assumptions that we look at to make sure that management has used reasonable assumptions, and we evaluate the credentials of the actuary to ensure that this is something that we can rely on, that they have the necessary credentials, and come to our conclusion on whether the estimate's appropriate.
And Madam Chair, forgive me for asking it, but it's been a while since I've been here. The police services, is that captured under this audit also, or is that a separate organization that would be doing that?
So
They equally have such liabilities that need to be reviewed.
Yes, so you get the actuary to estimate all of the employee benefits for all of the employee groups. And then additionally, the actuary segregates the liability by organization, so that each organization that produces financial statements are able to report their employee future benefits on their own.
Okay. Excellent, I appreciate that. Thank you, good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for, thank you for answering the questions. If there are no further questions, may I have a motion to receive item 10.2? Moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by Councillor Johnson. All those in favor? Carried, thank you. Item 10.3. Item 10.3 is use of external services for tax assessment and appeals. I believe we have a question, Councillor Clark.
Why? Why wouldn't we be hiring internal staff with the appropriate amount of experience to do the work? We just participated in the provincial audit process, and they pointed to the fact that we're hiring outside consultants when we could be hiring that expertise internally and controlling the cost, because the external consultants are generally more expensive than internal. So,
Yeah.
why?
So through the chair, and I appreciate the question, and that's why this report is before you, is I'll just, I'm sure committee members don't need reminding, as we've had challenges with respect to assessment appeals. There is a industry out there as it relates to supporting private sector property owners, and they're quite active as it relates to assessment appeals. To Councillor Clark's question, we have gone down the road of recruiting. We have had extraordinary challenges in recruiting and retaining assessment professionals because of the lack of assessment professionals. Over the last 2 years, we've gone through 3 recruitment processes. We've been successful, and in a majority of those cases, we've lost those individuals to competing municipalities within 6 months. And so the stopgap to ensure that we're active as it relates to assessment appeals is to backstop our internal staff and recognizing we have a lack of internal resources to be active on all material assessment appeals by implementing a roster system where we could engage external consultants. I would hope this would be a short-term solution until such time as we can properly recruit, but at the risk that we still have a competitive labor market and we have a challenge as it relates to recruitment and retaining what we're asking for as consideration to provide the appropriate level of resources in an effort to protect that assessment base.
So, am I to understand that in essence what we're setting up is an approved vendor list of experts, and when you need them, you call on them, but we're not paying them for sitting in their office?
Through the chair, that's correct. Well, we would, the intent is to create a roster. The intent as well is to create a procedure process whereby we identify financial materiality where the city would engage directly in an appeal. And recognizing that we've had challenges in the past and actively participating in appeal, there's a risk to the corporation that we could be foregoing some potential revenue because of that lack of resources. So to the councillor's question, that is the intent, is to generate a roster whereby we identify the need to participate in an appeal. If we can't support that need internally, we would turn to that roster and engage external consultants. The intent is not to do this extensively, but to ensure, especially in the case of industrial, because of the U.S. Steel appeal, there's been a number of requests for similar treatment under the principle of equity that represents a significant risk to the city. So in order to shore up the assessment that we feel that the city of Hamilton needs to preserve, we would engage external consultants as necessary.
I appreciate that, Madam Chair. I mean, my preference is always to have internal experts, but I understand, and it seems to be a reasonable explanation as to why we're going down this road, but you're going to report back on costs as we go through this process, so I appreciate that, Mr. Zagaric.
An excellent example of demand, supply, and the mobility of expertise. Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, thank you. And I've often wondered why we're not using outside expertise on this, because it's very specialized. And I remember in my previous life, I would have consultants come see me and say, we can save you a lot of money on taxes we won't charge you anything, just give us half of what we save. And they become real experts in that, and it worked. And so I think it'd be nice if we hired those same people that the companies are using to find the oops to argue our position on the other side. It's like getting the lawyer first, the best lawyer first before the other side gets it. And my only question, I think it's a great idea, because it's troubled me for a long time that we're having $1 billion in building permits for a number of years now and only seen incremental changes in our assessment. And the explanation we've always got is that assessment reduction is primarily for the big industrial users and some large commercial users like Jackson Square. My only question was, I didn't see anything about cost. What do you think it's going to cost, Mike? I know you don't know for sure till you close the bids, but what's your best guess? Because it's enhancement, if you will.
Yeah. So through the chair, I would expect it would be maybe somewhere in the area of 100 to 150,000, subject to the number of appeals. I apologize. Where I should have as well extended my previous answers to include is some of these vendors have unique platforms whereby they have information to identify where MPAC might have gaps as it relates to identifying developments and where we aren't capturing proper assessment. And so beyond what I've identified in terms of an investment, if we engage them for those services, that would be over and above that value.
Okay, I'm very satisfied with those answers. I see no other speakers, so I move the recommendation, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Pearson. An electronic vote, please. Thank you. That carries. Item 10.4, Citizen Committee Report. Hamilton Aboriginal Advisory Committee, updated terms of reference. Are there any questions? I don't see any. We require an electronic vote. It's moved by Councillor Partridge and seconded by Councillor Vanderbeek. Thank you. Thank you. It carries. 10.5, 2020 grant advances from the City Enrichment Fund. Are there any questions of staff on this item? I don't see any. May have a mover in Councillor Johnson and seconded by Councillor Collins. Electronic vote, please. Thank you. That carries. We don't have any motions. We don't have any notices of motions. Are there any items of general information or other business? Councillor Ferguson?
Oh, I see. It looks like Charles Brown is gone, has he? Okay. My question was going to be, I know I asked him last summer whether he'd be prepared to take on an audit of the DARTS eligibility, and he said he could. And Public Works formally passed the report along to Audit in December. And we got Transit Day coming up real soon, and has had an opportunity to look at it yet. And if so, what did they find?
Mr. Zagarek, are you?
So through the chair, I'll take that ask back to Jeanette and Charles, and possibly Charles can send an email to committee members as to the status of that request.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Private and confidential, we will require an electronic vote to approve the closed session minutes from December 5th of last year. May I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Partridge. You vote, please. Thank you, and that carries. I need a motion to adjourn. Councillor Pearson. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Clerk.